Thanks for coming. Before we begin proceedings, I'd like to acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. It's upon their ancestral lands that the University of Sydney is built. As we share our knowledge, teaching, learning, and research practices within the university, may we also pay respect to the knowledge embedded forever within the Aboriginal custodianship of country. And we also like to say that one of the things that has been going on in this space for tens of thousands of years is education about the relationship between humans and non-human, and we respect that. So welcome to students. It's great to see so many young folks here, to alumni, and to members of the Sydney community. I'm David Schlossberg. I'm a professor of environmental politics, and I'm also a co-director of the new Sydney Environment Institute. SEI is dedicated to bringing together a broad range of researchers here at the University of Sydney, working on a range of issues from climate change to animal studies, from sustainable cities to sustainable business. And on behalf of the SEI and the university, I'm very pleased to host and introduce Professor David Suzuki tonight. We've got a pretty straightforward program. I'll introduce our speaker. He'll speak about the challenges of the 21st century. After the talk, we'll have a little bit of time for questions, and I do ask for questions, not monologues, and respectful. I will cut you off. And afterward, Professor Suzuki will sign some more books for folks who are interested. It's not possible, really, to give a thorough introduction without taking too much time. Folks should know the basic bio and influences, or they wouldn't be here. But here's a short version. David Suzuki is a scientist, broadcaster, author, and co-founder of the David Suzuki Foundation. He's companion to the Order of Canada and recipient of UNESCO's Kalinga Prize for Science, the UN Environment Program Medal, the 2012 Inamori Ethics Prize, the 2009 Right Livelihood Award, UNEP's Global 500. Dr. Suzuki is Professor Emeritus at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver and holds 28 honorary degrees from universities around the world. He's familiar to television audiences as host of the multi-award-winning, long-running CBC Science and Natural History television series The Nature of Things, and to radio audiences as the original host of CBC Radio's Quirks and Quarks, as well as the acclaimed series It's a Matter of Survival and From Naked Ape to Super Species. In 1990, he co-founded with Dr. Tara Cullis the David Suzuki Foundation to work with government, business, and individuals to conserve our environment by providing science-based education, advocacy, and policy work for social change that today's situation demands. His written work includes more than 54 books, 19 of them for children. Dr. Suzuki lives with his wife and family in Vancouver, British Columbia. Now, for me, there are two crucial things that stand out in Dr. Suzuki's career and approach that I deeply respect. And first, throughout the various television shows, the focus hasn't just been on bringing attention to animals or species or threats, but on developing a kind of respect and receptivity toward the non-human realm in his human audiences. It's not just about being educated about the natural world, but of understanding our relationship with it, listening to the non-human, and changing the way an audience thinks about our immersion in natural systems. And that should really serve as a role model for us and deserves our thanks. And second, probably more controversially, I want to thank Dr. Suzuki for being here at exactly this moment in Australian history, to add to the voices critical of the new government's first moves on environmental policy. It must be difficult for a lifelong dedicated environmental scientist to watch a government simply try to shut itself off from science and knowledge as its very first act on climate change. I've seen this in the US, David's seen it in Canada, and it's not simply about disagreeing with scientists. It's about insisting that knowledge is no longer important to decision-making. That the proper response is to point out that ignorance is not an acceptable political ideology and to condemn the move, and we thank him for that. It's going to take a lot of voices like David Suzuki's to turn governments toward sane responses to climate change, but he's a leading guide for those interested in combining sound knowledge with an ethical dedication to the environment that sustains us. So we're pleased to host him and to learn from him tonight. David Suzuki.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that overly generous introduction, David. I, too, would like to acknowledge at the beginning of my talk that this is a traditional territory of the First Nations people of this land. As a grandfather of 2 Indigenous children who live on reserve yet, I think this is a very important thing to remember, that fact. I'm delighted to be a part of this wonderful series of talks, to join the list of eminent people who have already presented in this series. So thank you very much for inviting me to have this opportunity to share a few of my ideas with you. You see, we are at an unprecedented, critical point in human history. What we do or do not do in the next few years, I believe, could very well determine the fate of our species. That's a pretty melodramatic thing to say, that the fate of our species may be on the line now, but you don't have to listen to me. How about Sir Martin Rees, the Royal Astronomer of Britain, who was asked on the BBC, what are the chances that our species will survive by the end of this century? And his answer was 50-50. Or how about James Lovelock, who defined Gaia as the web of living things on the planet in one of his latest books, who said that by the year 2100, more than 90% of humanity will be gone. Or your eminent eco-philosopher, Clive Hamilton. One of his latest books was Requiem for a Species. And guess what species it's a requiem for? It's us. And I thank them. Many of my colleagues are saying, we've passed too many tipping points. We can't ever go back now to the abundance that the planet once exhibited. And I thank all of my colleagues for the urgency of their message. It is very, very late. But we must carry on with hope, not just mindless Pollyanna-ish hope that something good is going to happen, but hope based on the fact that we don't know enough to say it's too late. And with that hope, if we can pull back and give nature a chance, I believe she will be far more generous than we deserve. What is this critical state of the planet that I'm referring to? Humanity has very, very suddenly, in evolutionary terms, suddenly exploded as a global force. We as a species are now altering the properties of the biosphere on a geological scale. Physically, we divert and dam great rivers to create lakes the weight of whose water often induces earthquakes. We are draining entire wetlands. We are removing mountaintops to get at the treasures below. We have dug open pit mines into the earth, and we are getting now earthquakes from the fracking for gas that's going on, it seems, all over the world. Chemically, we've altered the planet. We now have passed 400 parts per million of carbon dioxide, the first time we've achieved that level in over 1.5 million years, in the past 1.5 million years. That carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is dissolving at the interface with the ocean, creating carbonic acid that is acidifying the ocean waters. We are disrupting the nitrogen cycle of the planet with all of the fertilizers we add to land that runs into the oceans, causing eutrophication and ultimately depriving oxygen over vast dead zones of all of the oceans on Earth. And we are polluting the air, the water, the soil with toxic chemicals. Every one of us, however cleanly you live your lives, I dare say every one of us is carrying dozens of chemicals that are defined as toxic or carcinogenic. Endocrine disruptors from plastics are disrupting the reproductive cycles, not only in fish and birds, but human beings. And biologically, we are transforming the planet, clearing entire ecosystems to build our roads and our farms for cattle and for housing. We've introduced alien species all over the earth, causing great disruptions, and we are driving an estimated 50,000 species to extinction every year. That is why scientists refer to this in the past 200 years as the Anthropocene epoch, a period when we have become a geological force. When I give talks like this, often in the audience there are politicians and business people, and some of them come up at the end of my talk and they say to me, well, that was interesting, but you know, Suzuki, you have to be realistic. The economy is the bottom line. That will determine the strategies that we develop and what we are able to achieve when it comes to environmental issues. Now, I'm a biologist, and that never made any sense to me. But first, before I go into a different bottom line that I would like to define, how have we arrived at this moment in time, the Anthropocene epoch? I've been amazed at the way that scientists today can use DNA, the genetic material, and use it in many ways, but one of them is to follow the movement of humanity through evolutionary time across the surface of the planet. And all of the trails lead back to Africa 150,000 years ago. That was our birthplace. And I'm still waiting for the Ku Klux Klan to invite me to talk to them so that I can tell these pointy-headed characters, we're all Africans, for God's sakes. What's your problem? We are Africans by birth. And if we try to imagine the world as it was when we were born, imagine that we are able to take a time machine and go back 150,000 years and park above the Rift Valley in Africa and gaze down, we would see animals in abundance and diversity beyond anything that you could see today in the Serengeti. And we'd have to look very, very carefully to spot the little clumps of 2, 3, or 4 of these funny-looking furless apes, and that was us. Now, I am absolutely sure 150,000 years ago, no other species said to their kids, shh, shh, don't bother that creature. They're going to take over the planet. I mean, think about it. We weren't very impressive. I mean, there weren't very many of us. We weren't very big. We weren't very strong or fast, or we weren't endowed with special sensory abilities. Like, what the hell did we have going for us? Well, the fact is that our secret, what enabled us to take over the planet in 150 millennia, was hidden. It was a 2-kilogram organ buried deep in our skulls. The human brain was the key to our enormous success. That brain has what the Nobel Prize winner François Jacob says, it has an innate need for order. We don't like it when things happen around us that we don't understand, or chaos. So we immediately try to create order out of the world that we see around us. And that's what leads to the construction of worldviews in which everything is fit in together. That brain conferred a massive memory. No other mammal on Earth has a memory capacity of a human brain. And we were curious, and we were inventive. We dreamed of all manner of things, and we imagined a concept, or created a concept called the future. Future doesn't exist. I mean, what's real is now and our memory of what happened in the past. But because we invented the idea of a future, we are the only animal that realized we can affect the future by what we do today. Bringing all of our knowledge and observations together, we can look ahead and see where opportunities lie. We can see where the dangers are. And we can deliberately choose today to avoid the dangers and exploit the opportunities. I believe foresight was the great ability, that leg up that gave us a huge advantage over all the rest of life on Earth. And that foresight, that ability to look ahead, enabled us to wander across the entire world, to every continent, and to become the dominant animal in the world today. And today, we have the gifted foresight of scientists and supercomputers. We've never had the capacity to look at this information and to look ahead as we do today. And for over 40 years, scientists have been warning us that we are headed down a very dangerous path. And we we have to look ahead and see what the other opportunities are. Let me give you an example of the kind of warnings we've been hearing. Here's a remarkable document that came out in November of 1992. It's called World Scientists Warning to Humanity. It is signed by 1,700 senior scientists, top-notch scientists, from 71 countries in the world, including over half of all living Nobel Prize winners at that time. That's quite a roster of signatories. What were the world scientists warning us of in this document? So let me just read a few lines from this. Human beings in the natural world are on a collision course. Human activities inflict harsh and often irreversible damage on the environment and on critical resources. If not checked, many of our current practices put at serious risk the future we wish for human society, and may so alter the living world that it will be unable to sustain life in the manner that we know. Fundamental changes are urgent if we are to avoid the collision our present course will bring about. And then they go on to list the areas of collision: the atmosphere, water resources, oceans, soil, forests, species, and population. And then the words grow even more bleak. No more than one or a few decades remain. This is in 1992. Before the chance to avert the threats we now confront will be lost, and the prospects for humanity immeasurably diminished. A great change in our stewardship of the earth and life on it is required if vast human misery is to be avoided and our global home on this planet is not to be irretrievably mutilated. And then they list the 5 urgent things that they say must be started immediately. This is a frightening document. Scientists of this stature don't, as a rule, sign such strongly worded documents. But if this is a frightening document, the response of the press around the world was terrifying. There was none. And we see the fruition of that avoidance of dealing with the science today as I come here to Australia a week after your election. A government, a federal government, that is deliberately turning its back on an organization created to provide the best scientific evidence we have to deal with the great problems that confront us. We are turning our backs on the very strategy of success that got us to where we are today. What has happened? How are we at this moment? And I must say, before you think of poor Australia, Canada has been going through this now for years, with the most right-wing government that you can imagine, shutting down every avenue of any science that may impinge on climate change, muzzling government scientists so that they can only speak to the public or the press if their words are vetted first through the Prime Minister's office. Indeed, they cannot publish any scientific paper without it first being molded through the PMO's government office. This is a terrifying situation because if we now control the science and the information that comes out, if everything must be vetted through our government's political agenda, then we're right into George Orwell's 1984 and Newspeak. When you convince people that black is white and war is peace, you can tell them anything. What is going to determine your government's policies now? If they're going to shut down the avenues of scientific information, are we going to listen to all the pundits in the Murdoch press? Is that what's going to guide us? Is it going to be all of the PR folks for the fossil fuel industry? Is it going to be the Bible or the Quran? It is a frightening moment in human history. For 95% of the 150,000 years that we have existed, we were nomadic hunter-gatherers. And when you're a creature that has to carry everything you own on your back, following plants and animals through the seasons, you know that you are a part of nature and utterly dependent on nature for your well-being and your survival. In the last 10,000 years of our existence, we became farmers. 10,000 years ago, the agricultural revolution began. And until very, very recently, the vast majority of people on Earth lived in rural village communities because we were agrarian animals. And farmers know very well that weather and climate impinge on their lives and livelihood. In Canada, farmers know that the amount of snow in the winter is directly related to the amount of moisture in the soil in the summer. Farmers know that you have to have insects to pollinate flowering plants. Farmers understand that certain species of plants take nitrogen from the air, fix it as fertilizer in the soil. Farmers know that we are a part of nature and dependent on nature for our well-being. Suddenly, though, our relationship with the planet has changed. The population of human beings has absolutely exploded. When the agricultural revolution began 10,000 years ago, it's estimated there were 20 million human beings around the world. By the time Jesus Christ is said to have been born, we estimate 200 million people. So the agricultural revolution had a huge impact on our survival. But then it still took 1,800 years before we reached 1 billion human beings on the planet, about 1803. I was born in 1936 when there were 2 billion people on the earth. Imagine in my lifetime, the population has more than tripled. Anybody can do a graph on a piece of paper where the x-axis is 150,000 years and the y-axis is a number of people in billions. And what you'll see is that curve is virtually flat for most of that time and then suddenly rises straight off the page in the last pencil width of time. This has happened very, very suddenly. And all 7 billion people have to breathe air, drink water, eat food, clothe, and shelter ourselves. When you have that many human beings, just the act of living means we have an enormous ecological footprint. There has never been 1 billion of any mammalian species at all before. We're at 7 billion. So we have a huge demand for air, water, and land. But of course, we're not like rabbits or rats or mice. Every one of us has used on our behalf an enormous amount of technology. Technology that allows us to explore every avenue of the planet for raw materials, for resources, to use the entire planet to dump our toxic materials, to provide us with our clothing, our food, our cars, our computers. All of that is technology applied on our behalf, and that ramps up enormously the ecological footprint, the weight of our species, of each individual on Earth, beyond anything any other species has ever had. And of course, it doesn't end there. Every one of us is a consumer, and we love to shop. And everything that we buy comes out of the earth. And when we're finished with it, we'll go back into the earth. And that escalates our ecological footprint. And we now have a global economy, a globalized economy to serve our consumptive demands, to use that technological muscle power to exploit the planet in ways that have never been possible before. And when you add all of that up together, our numbers, our technological muscle power, our consumptive demand, and our global economy, we have become a new kind of force on the planet. You all know the consequences then of this very sudden change in our status on the planet. It's the effect of changing chemistry of the atmosphere, so that we have the problem of climate change. The oceans are an absolute mess. We've denuded the planet of most of the great forests in the world. Species are going extinct, and toxic pollution is spread around the world. At this very moment, when all of these things are coming together at once, when we have to make some major decisions about how we're going to live, we have suddenly been blinded in our ability to see the reality of what's happening. And that's because we've undergone a huge shift in the way that we live. In 1900, there were 1.6 billion human beings on Earth. There were only 14 cities with more than 1 million people. London was the largest with 6.5 million. Tokyo was the 7th largest with 1.5 million people. I dare say that Australia, like Canada in 1900, didn't have any cities with 1 million people. And most people around the world lived in rural villages because, as I said earlier, we were a farming animal. In only 100 years, by the year 2000, we underwent an amazing change. By the year 2000, there were now 4 times as many of us, 6 billion human beings, but more than 400 cities with more than 1 million people. The 10 largest cities in the year 2000 all had more than 11 million people. Tokyo was the largest city. It went from 1.5 million to 26 million people in 100 years. In the industrialized world, over 80% of us now live in big cities. And in a big city, our perception of the world and where we belong undergoes a radically big change. In a city, we live in a human-created environment where it's easy to think we're different from the rest of creation. We're so smart, we create our own habitat. So in a city, as long as we have parks where we can go and camp and play, who needs nature? In a city, our highest priority is our jobs. We need a job to earn the money to buy the things that we want. And so the economy then comes to dominate our lives. And what is the consequence of that? That the Prime Minister of Canada has told us now for years, we can't afford to do anything about reducing greenhouse gas emissions. It'll destroy the economy. So we've elevated the economy above the very atmosphere that keeps us alive. Over and over we hear, we have to clear cut our forests. We have to drag nets on heavy weights across the ocean floor. We have to dump raw sewage into the oceans. We have to use the air, water, and soil as a toxic dump in order to be globally competitive. The economy, then, is the highest priority. And this is why it is an amazing point in time. You see, I was galvanized on a different course in my life by a woman. Well, that's happened all my life, but in this case, I never met her. I wish I had. When Rachel Carson published a book called Silent Spring in 1962, and it was all about the unexpected effects of pesticides. And as a result of her book, I, like millions of other people around the world, was swept up in what we now see as the modern environmental movement. And it was a very exhilarating time. We saw the creation of departments of the environment. When her book came out, there wasn't a single department of the environment in any government on the planet. The word environment in 1962 didn't mean what it's come to mean today. And we've seen laws to protect the air, the water, the oceans, species that are endangered, and we've got millions of hectares of protected land now, all because of the environmental movement. And we fought battles, lost many, but celebrated victories. Some that I was involved in were the push of the Americans in Alaska to drill for oil in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, which is the calving grounds of the porcupine caribou herd, the great mass of, it's North America's equivalent to the wildebeest migration, is a caribou migration into the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. And there's apparently oil under there, and the oil industry wanted to drill there. And each time we fought back and stopped the proposal to drill. In Canada, we wanted to drill in Hecate Strait off the coast of British Columbia, one of the most dangerous areas. It's a shallow part of the ocean in the northern corner of British Columbia, and we stopped it. The Americans proposed to bring super tankers from the North Slope in Alaska down along the British Columbia coast to Seattle, where that oil would be refined, and we stopped that. There was a dam on the Peace River at Site C that we also stopped, and one that I got very involved in, a dam called Cararau in Altamira in Brazil, and we persuaded the World Bank to pull back its loan to build that dam. We celebrated these as great victories, but 30, 35 years later, each one of those issues I've just mentioned is back on the agenda, and we're fighting them again. So I believe that we as environmentalists fundamentally failed. As we were celebrating what we thought were great victories, we weren't using those battles as a way of educating people to see the world in a different way. It wasn't just a matter of stopping a dam or stopping clear-cutting a forest or stopping a drilling project. It was because we recognized that protecting the biosphere, protecting nature, was a critical part of our survival and well-being. The fact that we didn't learn that lesson is reflected in our attempts to repeat the same kind of proposals over and over again. I was asked by the vice president of Shell to come together with other environmentalists and members of the fossil fuel industry to work out a way of dealing with our future energy needs. And I agreed to do that, but when we got in the room, we were completely constrained by the economic requirements of the business community. We couldn't just explore it on basic principles. We had to look at the economic realities that we were dealing in. The CEO of a consortium of companies working in the Alberta tar sands, Marcel Coutu, called me, said, "Can I come and see you?" I said, "Sure, come on and see me." He came and saw me. He said, "Are you willing to meet with these companies in the tar sands?" I said, "Sure." I said, "I only have one requirement, that we leave our vested interests outside the door, that we come together as human beings and agree, that we come together and agree together on certain concepts. I don't want to fight anymore. When we come together and fight, then someone loses and someone wins, or we compromise. And I don't think we can compromise anymore. And I don't think there should be losers. We can't go on that way. We've got to agree." Unfortunately, when I said that was the condition in which I would discuss with them, I never heard from them again. But I believe that the challenge now is that we have to change the way that we see the world we're a part of. This is called a paradigm shift. We haven't done that in all of the 50 years of battling that we've had since Rachel Carson published Silent Spring. So if I were to go into a meeting with others, stakeholders, I hate that term because we're all stakeholders in the future of the biosphere. But if I were to come together with a broad spectrum of people and say, we're all going to leave our vested interests outside, and we're going to work on a platform of agreement that we can then build on, I would say, here's my suggestion for starters. How about this? The first most important thing to remember is we are animals. We are biological creatures. And I never realized how explosive that suggestion was until I was giving a talk to the first annual meeting of Green Builders in Austin, Texas, many years ago. It was a big audience, 3 times bigger than this audience, but there were a lot of children in the audience. So at the end of my talk, I said, now kids, if you remember one talk from my speech here, remember we are animals. My God, did their parents get pissed off at me? Don't you dare call my daughter an animal. We're human beings. And I realized we have elevated ourselves. You can tell the way we talk to each other, right? If you call someone a pig or a chicken or a worm or a snake or an ape, you're insulting them, right? Because we think somehow we are superior to those critters there. Years ago, I went to a store in Calgary, And in the front of the store was a big sign that said, "No animals allowed." And I went up to the owner of the store. I said, if you enforce that sign, you're not going to have customers. And the frightening thing to me was, he didn't know what the hell I was talking about. He thought I was crazy. We are animals. We're biological creatures. And what is our most fundamental need as animals? And I like it when there are children. I see some children in the audience here. All right, kids, I want you to do an experiment for me. Take a deep breath. Okay? Now hold it, and don't take another breath for 5 minutes. I'm going to keep talking. Hold your breath. No, don't breathe. And of course, you're going to breathe in a few seconds. Children are so trusting, but they find out very quickly, you can't commit suicide by deliberately holding your breath. Your body will not allow you. Why is that? Because we need air every minute of our lives. Without air for more than 3 or 4 minutes, you're dead. If we breathe contaminated air, we're sick. Air, is there anyone here that would disagree with me that clean air has got to be our highest priority as animals? And then we can go down, work our way through our biological needs, where each of us is 60 to 70% water by weight. We're a big blob of water with enough organic thickener added, we don't dribble away on the floor. We're water. And the body leaks, right? It comes out of our skin and our mouth and our eyes and our crotch, and we lose water all the time. So we've got to top up with water. Do you think this is Australian water? First thing you learn in school is the hydrologic cycle. Water cartwheels around the earth. This glass of water, I don't care where it was drawn from, this glass of water's got molecules that have come from every ocean on the planet, every canopy of rainforest on earth. Every wetland, every prairie. Water is like air. It's a glue that connects us all together. And if we don't have water for more than a few days, we're dead. And if you have contaminated water, you're sick. So let's put clean air, clean water. And of course, every bit of the food that we eat to create our bodies was once alive. We eat the carcasses of plants and animals, break them apart, and incorporate their bodies in our bodies. And most of our food was grown in the soil. So surely clean soil and food should be at the highest level. Some of us can last a few weeks without food, but we will die without food, and we sicken if our food is contaminated. And finally, every bit of the energy in our bodies that we need to move and grow and reproduce, all of that is sunlight. Sunlight captured by plants through photosynthesis, and then we get those molecules by eating the plants or eating the animals that eat the plants. So the photosynthetic activity of the planet is vital to our health and well-being. And what delivers clean air, what delivers clean water, clean soil, and clean energy is the diversity of living creatures all over the planet. So I would submit as a beginning, can we all agree, as biological creatures, the most fundamental needs that we have that we must protect above anything else is clean air, clean water, clean soil, clean energy, and biodiversity. And is there anyone here that can give me a compelling reason why the economy should come before that? Is there anyone here who has a more compelling need that can be suggested? And then we are more than just biological beings, we're social creatures. And what is our most fundamental social need that we should fight to protect? And to my amazement, as I began to prepare to write a book called The Sacred Balance, and looked at our social needs, what I found was our basic need is love. Now, I know you're going to go, oh my God, this guy's a new age hippy-dippy, what? I mean this in the most profound, scientifically demonstrable way. From infancy on, we need love. There are windows when children are developing, when they have to be comfortable to know that they are protected and loved, to be hugged and kissed. Children need love to develop to their full potential, to be welcomed into the human community, to know how to love back and feel empathy for their fellow humans. And if you look at the literature of children growing up under conditions of genocide, terror, or war. Children in Ceausescu's Romania, in orphanages, who were fed and clothed but were never hugged and kissed. Children are fundamentally crippled physically and psychically. They die like flies compared to children who've had love all their lives. We need love to be fully human and realize our full human potential. How do we do that? We need to develop societies in which there is full opportunity for employment, where we deal with hunger and poverty, where we have social justice and gender equity, where we are freed from terrorism, genocide, and war. To me, those are fundamental issues that concern me in my search for a sustainable future. To guarantee our love for children, we need to fulfill all of those social conditions. And then, of course, we are spiritual beings. And I suspect in developed countries like yours and mine, we desperately need spirit. I don't mean this in a formal religious sense. We need to understand our place in the biosphere, that we are part of a community of organisms who mutually allow each other to exist and flourish. That we were born out of nature, and when we die, we return back to the natural world. We need to know that there are forces impinging on us that we will never understand or control. That there are sacred places where we go with veneration, not looking for constant resources or opportunity. And I believe that this is what we have to work on together, to define what is the fundamental foundation of the way that we're living today. Those things that are so important, we work to guarantee those above anything else. And then we ask, how do we make a living? How do we create an economy that protects and fulfills those needs that we have? So I believe that this is the nature of the discussions we've got to have if we're going to truly grapple with the issues that confront us today. Our problem is that we've become so powerful, and we've created so many powerful concepts. We've come to believe they're real and that they matter before anything else. You know, a few hundred years ago, people believed in dragons and demons and monsters. I mean, they really believed in them. And if we thought that they were pissed off, man, we would give them money and jewels and gold, and we just wanted to do anything to placate those entities. Well, today we know they don't exist. They were creations of the human mind. But what do? We replace it with something else called the market or the economy. And we act as if they're real things. I mean, I swear, look at your newspapers or listen to the newscast. Oh, the economy's not feeling too happy today. What? You know, I mean, that's exactly what Mitt Romney said when he ran against Obama. He said, if Mr. Obama is reelected, the market is not going to be happy. We reify an entity that we have created, and we act as if they're real. And we do the same thing that people did in the past. Remember 2008? Market meltdown caused by banks? What did Mr. Obama do? He can't afford to support a huge program in renewable energy, but he threw hundreds of billions of dollars into the banks that created the problem in the first place, trying to get the economy back up. It's crazy to replace dragons with these other human constructs called the economy or the market. We should realize that we live in a world that is shaped and constrained by laws of nature. Physics informs us you can't build a rocket that will travel faster than the speed of light. We know that. The law of gravity says you can't build an anti-gravity machine here on Earth. And the first and second laws of thermodynamics tell us we can't build a perpetual motion machine. We understand that. Those are laws of physics, and we live within that. In chemistry, we're ruled by the properties of atomic matter. We're ruled by diffusion constants and reaction rates. We understand all that. And that determines the kind of molecules we can synthesize and what we can't. And we live with that. And biology is the same way. We know that every species lives within ecosystems, and there's a carrying capacity that can carry a maximum number of animals or plants in that ecosystem. We are not confined to a single ecosystem, but the biosphere is our home, but the biosphere will have a carrying capacity for an animal like us. And we have a biological need for air, water, soil. That's the world we live in, determined by laws of nature. Other things that humans make are not forces of nature. Yet we draw lines around property, around our cities and states and countries. Boy, do we will go to war and we will kill and die to protect those boundaries. And yet, you know what? Nature doesn't care two hoots about human boundaries. Try telling a fish or a bird or even a tree or an insect, hey, you belong to New South Wales. You can't go over there. You belong to us. I mean, it's absurd. And air, try to constrain air within these boundaries. But we've created them and we take them very seriously. And we create ideas like capitalism, the economy, markets, and corporations. And the result of that is we go to Copenhagen to deal with the next phase of the climate initiative after Kyoto. And we get 192 countries all come together to deal with the air that doesn't belong to anybody, but through the lenses of 192 national borders and the agendas of 192 different economic systems. And we ask nature to conform to our creations. We want to shoehorn nature into our creations. This is insane. It is absolutely insane. And these global initiatives to try to get everybody will never work because we're working in the wrong paradigm. We're seeing it as if we're in control. Can we build a different way of living? And I think there are many, many examples of beginnings of trying to move towards that. And I'm sorry I don't have the time to go into it. Individuals, of course, around the world, there are all kinds of individual actions to try to move away. I have to admit, yesterday I spent all day with people working for the city of Sydney. I was blown away by your city, blown away by Clover, your Lord Mayor, and the people that she has hired to look at the issues of genuine sustainability. Sydney, if I have anything to do with it, and I'm going home to propose a big production television show comparing Sydney with Vancouver, my home. But I think Sydney is already a world leader in setting an example for the way that you're going to deal with the question of renewable sustainability of the city within a few decades. And you're doing it by not breaking the problem into silos. Oh, you're in charge of energy, you're in charge of transportation, you're in charge of building. The city is looking at it in a holistic way, which is the way that we have to do things, and seeing it as part of the ecosphere that we live within. So lots of examples, though, in cities, and there are examples, not many, within businesses. The one I cite is Interface Carpets. There aren't many examples like Interface, but there are a few. Lots of greenwashing going on, but genuine paradigm shift, not very many around the world, but partly because the economic system we work within is so flawed that it's not possible. But I want to just mention 3 countries at the end of the talk. Bolivia. Bolivia, the poorest country in South America, but elected the first indigenous prime minister anywhere in the world. Evo Morales has said that we constantly have to refer back in all we do to Pachamama. Pachamama is Mother Earth. And he sees the world as existing with the good graces and abundance of Pachamama. So Pachamama is the highest priority for Ecuador. And so Evo at the Rio Plus 20 conference in Rio this year Ivo pointed out that the green economy that everybody talks about, that China has embraced, and so many business people are running around saying the green economy is still the economic system that is destroying the planet. So the green economy is simply a way of making that economic system more efficient and reducing the amount in terms of the product impact on the environment, but it's still within the construct of a fundamentally destructive economic system. Thank you, Ivo, for pointing that out. Ecuador. Ecuador has a prime minister, a president, who is a PhD in economics. He got his degree in the United States. Correa is a very popular president, but when I interviewed him, he said, Ecuador is here, and as a government, we're not here to serve corporations and the economy. Corporations and the economy are there to serve us. And my job as a political leader is to work towards what they call sumak kausai, which is a Quechua phrase meaning the good life. It's not about stuff. It's not about economic growth. It's about the good life. And the good life is to be in balance with nature. And Ecuador has enshrined the rights of Pachamama in their constitution. The first country on the planet to actually enshrine Mother Earth in their constitution, which means that trees and rivers and lakes and soil and forests have a constitutional right to exist. Well, you could say that's just words. What does it mean? And I like to point out that in the southern part of Ecuador is a river called the Vilcabamba River that is reputed to be so pure that if you drink it all your life, you live longer. So, of course, Americans have immediately rushed down and bought property on the Vilcabamba River. And an American couple living beside the Vilcabamba have a large farm, and they've noticed that a road building company was building a road along the edge of the valley and dumping all of the gravel and sand and boulders into the river. And the river was flowing faster and washing out more and more of the fields adjacent to the river. So they sued the road building company on behalf of the Vilcabamba River. Now you can't, if you're suing on behalf of Pachamama, you can't sue for money. Pachamama can't use money. But they won the first legal case in the world on behalf of a non-human entity, the Vilcabamba River, and that company now has to restore the Vilcabamba back to its pre-development conditions. So that's the power of enshrining the rights of Pachamama in the Constitution. And finally, of course, I just want to end with just mentioning Bhutan. Thank God for Bhutan, this tiny country in the Himalayan mountains in which the king, when asked in 1971, what is Bhutan's GNP, said, Bhutanese are not interested in GNP, gross national product. We're interested in GNH, the gross national happiness. And this last year, Bhutan introduced a resolution, the only one they've ever introduced in the United Nations, saying that governments agree their primary goal is the happiness of the people and the well-being of life in their jurisdiction, and it passed unanimously through the United Nations. So, maybe we can talk about what is happiness and all that stuff. But I just want to say that there are suggestions that there are alternative ways of looking through the world with a radically different bottom line from the one that we're caught up in now. So let's get on with it. Thank you very much.
I have two questions. You talked about Sydney, that it's a wonderful city and it's a nice city. My question is why it's so expensive? Especially if you, I was kidding.
You better be.
Yeah, I expect.
You better be, because I was going to hammer you.
I expected, lots of that. But my second question is, what do you think the most famous religions in the world?
I have no idea.
You don't
What do you
wanna
mean most famous? I mean, I'm not a theologian. I don't know.
I just want to know your idea. What do you think they can do in preventing Earth from going to...
Oh, yeah, well, we have all this
disaster?
stuff about stewardship and so on, and I think that's important to see it. I'm an atheist, so what do I know about religion? Nothing. I don't give a shit about religion, quite frankly. But I'm not trying to proselytize or spread it. I just cling to that for myself. But, you know, we hear about every religion has got lines in it about stewardship. I don't like the idea of stewardship because it implies that we have become so important and all-powerful that it's our job to take care of nature with, you know, more carefully. But stewardship has implicit in it, and what I like about it is the idea of long-term sustainability. You steward it for our own use, but in the long run, you keep it going. So I'm sure, of course, religion is a part of our lives and determines our actions. The problem is, I believe, that we act according to the worldview shaped by such things as religion, gender, socioeconomic class, and in large part, we have to shuck a lot of that off so that we can see very clearly. And quite frankly, for me, the one group that has the kind of perspective that I think we need are indigenous people around the world. And these are the most disadvantaged groups in virtually every society. But I find that they still cling, however badly they've been treated, they still cling to a radically different idea of their place and dependence on the rest of nature to define who they are, to create who they are through their culture, is that sense of embeddedness in Pachamama. That's where we've got to, if that's a religion, then to me it's a different perspective or paradigm.
Hi. You mentioned that you thought that the environmental movement in the 60s had missed an opportunity to educate or to create a change in the mindset. Do you think that the lessons have been learned and that the current environmental movement is doing that better than the people in the 1960s? Or
No, definitely not. No, I think we failed fundamentally, and the problem is that most of us still in the environmental movement are still involved in the fight. And especially coming here after Mr. Abbott was elected Prime Minister, I can just see people are getting ready to fight. And if I was an Australian, I would be too. But in the long run, that's not going to get us there. We've got to work out some way of meeting and saying, look, let's forget all of those political parties and promises and all that stuff. Let's forget about the economic agenda and all that stuff. Let's talk now as human to human and work it out. Well, you're not going to get that with this government. But that's what we need to do in the long run. And I'm not sure, a lot of environmentalists have been co-opted into the idea of working with business. Lots of my friends have done that. The problem is, when you do that, you always have to buy into the economic paradigm within which that business exists. And if you don't do that, then you're not a part of the thing. And so they sell out all the time. They compromise all the time. This economic system is fundamentally flawed and cannot continue to dominate the way we do things. To me, the two major flaws are the fact that if I'm fighting a forestry company against logging, then, and we have to do it within the economic system, worldview, he tells me, as the CEO of the forestry company, I can guarantee you we've got X number of jobs, I'll make this much profit, there are this many board feet of lumber, and there are this many cubic meters of pulp. He can tell me all of that. And I have to say, well, we could sell some berries, and maybe we could get some cures for cancer, and maybe but the reason we're fighting for the forest are not in any of those things. The forest is what keeps the planet habitable for an animal like us, like taking carbon out of the atmosphere and putting oxygen back in it. Not a bad service for an animal like us. If we didn't have that, we wouldn't be around. But that's not in the economic system. It's called an externality. So the important things the forest is doing, we can't even include in the discussion. So the idea of going in with business and saying, yeah, we've got to work together now and we've got to reduce our footprint, blah, 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 but always within that economic paradigm. So I think that the problem is nature has been excluded from the economic system that we've got. And the other thing is we have a built-in suicidal idea that growth is the be-all and end-all that must be promoted. First of all, it's impossible. We live within the confines of the biosphere. Nothing within the biosphere can grow indefinitely. And it's not possible, and it shouldn't be the aim of all governments and businesses. And yet, if you were to ask any politician, ask any business person, how well did you do last year? And my bet is within 1 picosecond, you'd be talking about the GDP and how much it grew or didn't grow, or the number of jobs and the amount of profit. Growth has become the definition of progress. And growth, steady growth forever, is the creed of cancer cells and economists. And the end result is the same.
Hello, Mr. Suzuki. My name is Drew. Can you hear me? Yeah. My name is Drew Pyatt. I'm an American exchange student. And my question actually goes perfectly with what you were just saying. I agree with you that the economic system is incredibly flawed, but it is the reality of the system that we live in today. So I'm kind of curious what your ideas, if you could radically change everything, what would your new system look like?
Well, we had a time when we radically changed the system. In 1944, as the Allies knew that they were going to win the war and they would inherit a war-torn world in the Pacific and in the Atlantic, in Europe and in Asia. And the question is, what do we do with the economy in that post-war period? So delegates from 44 countries gathered in Bretton Woods in Maine. John Maynard Keynes was one of the leading economists at that conference. And out of that conference, they created the World Bank, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, GATT, the Global Agreement in Tariffs and Trade. They pegged world currency to the American greenback, and they got the economies of the world up and running again. And the two countries that were absolutely obliterated, Germany and Japan, became two of the most powerful economies on the planet. So it worked. The problem there was they left out nature. We've come to define progress on the basis of economic progress on the growth model. So it's time, long past overdue, to have another Bretton Woods, to bring together people and not only re-examine that economic system and include nature, but work towards a society in which we degrow. We've got to shrink the economies of the developed world. It's not just a matter of a static economy, we've got to shrink it. And when people say, oh, that's outrageous, how we would die, what's happened in Japan? Japan had one of the strong economies and went in, two decades ago, went into a total downturn. They've had no growth for 20 years. Go to Japan today, they haven't fallen to pieces. Seem to be a hell of a lot of waste going on and consumption and activity. What the hell is this idea? Growth. Grow, grow, grow. You know, we look at China, we envy China. My God, they're growing at double-digit amount. You know, if our economy grew at 10% a year, it would double in 7 years. And what do we want more for? Are we happier with all this stuff? We're not asking even the right questions. You know, what's an economy for? Are there no limits? How much is enough? Are we happier? I think if we don't answer those questions, what the hell is this blind push for more, more, more growth? It's got to be overturned. And please don't give us the notion that, well, there's nothing you can do about it, that's the way it is. We invented the damn thing. It's the one thing we can change, and we have to. Not saying it's going to be easy.
Thanks, Dr. Suzuki. My name's Jim McElroy, and I'm from Socialist Alliance. I just want to say that the problem which you have referred to a number of times of the economy is the problem of political power. And the problem of the environment movement is that every time they win something, big business comes and takes it back again. And now we know that the government was elected largely by Rupert Murdoch, not by the Australian people. So I wonder what you think we can do in tackling an issue like big coal, which is now going to get a massive boost from our new government, and actually our carbon footprint in Australia is going to multiply several times out of this. Thank you.
Well, you're an Australian, for God's sake. I'm a Canadian. Don't ask me to solve your problems. I'm focused on my Prime Minister, who is the worst thing that we've had ever in the history of Canada. This guy loved John Howard and George Bush, and now he's going to outdo those two guys, and he is outdoing it. So we've got our own problems. Please don't bother me. Your problems are trivial compared to mine. But, you know, I came here and I was amazed at how depressed people seem to be. But, you know, the thing I now find, you know, it seems every time I come to Australia, there's a new federal election. You've got such a short interval between elections. And now I'm going, hallelujah, you only have 2.5 years. That's not much time to get your forces up. You still have a democracy. Murdoch or Gina Reinhardt or any of these other people, you still have a democracy. Let's get on it and show that you can galvanize people to get worried about the future of our children. It's an opportunity for you, and you've only got 2.5 years to do it within. But in all seriousness, it is true. I mean, the media are so heavily tilted, it becomes very difficult. And I really think it's got to be the way that Obama has used social media. You see what he did. We now have a big campaign coming up in Canada that it's a 2-month tour I'm going to make across Canada, trying to galvanize public discussion so we can enshrine a right to a healthy environment in our Constitution. And the person running it ran Obama's campaign in Florida, the most critical state in the United States. And it's mind-boggling the way things have changed, and that is the use of social media to galvanize action and actual person-to-person contact at the grassroots level. And I just spent the morning with Anna Rose, absolutely impressive woman here in Australia. She understands very, very clearly. So the kind of challenges and the kind of opportunities you have. It's going to be a very exciting 2.5 years now.
Dr. Suzuki, my name's Gary Webb and my background is in education. My question relates to population. You talked about the last pencil width of the graph and the going straight up. It seems to me that unless we can, as a world society, can address the population growth issue, everything else is for naught, really. We can do everything we like on a per capita basis in terms of environmental impact, but unless we can, we have to at least get our decrease in per capita input to be offsetting the increase in population to stay where we are, which is not satisfactory anyway. So population is the fundamental problem, it seems to me, population growth, that is. And so how can we get a paradigm, in the paradigm shift, how can we move to stable population?
Well,
and even more importantly, what are the strategies that governments and others can do to limit population growth?
Well, the terrible thing, of course, is the time crunch. We know that we're just coming up against a brick wall and we're rushing towards it. And the kind of changes that are going to be needed to get that birth rate down are going to take quite a long time. We know, well, in the industrialized world, generally, we are not replacing ourselves with children, but the problem is there is a very nice correlation between population growth and economic growth. And many governments, the Canadian government, thinks that correlation shows a causal relationship, that the growth of population is the cause of economic growth. So Canadians are not replacing themselves, and so my government, without even a single committee on population, is using immigration to keep that curve going up because of the belief that there is a causal relationship, which I believe is simply a spurious correlation. And we're using population growth through immigration in the most terrible way. We're ripping off the developing world of talent by getting their doctors and their highly trained people who they need desperately, we're attracting them to Canada. Or we're getting people to pay outrageous amounts of money to get rich people to inject that money into our country. It's absolutely disgusting. I got into a big fight recently because I was interviewed by a French press and I said Canada is full. Environmentalists don't like to deal with the issue of population because of the risk always of being accused of being racist and elitist. But the reality is, if you go by the ecological footprint per person, we are, in the industrialized world, way beyond the capacity of our countries to support us. And all of humanity has a footprint that would, if every country in the world could fulfill our needs as high as we have in Australia or Canada, as you all know, we'd need 4 more planets. So population, it's not just a matter of numbers of bodies, it's the amount of resource used per person. And when you factor in the amount of resource used per person, we in the industrialized world are by far the overpopulated planet. We are the major predator of resources and the major producer of toxic pollution around the world. So the challenge is in us. The challenge is to break that presumed idea that growth of population is directly causal of the economic growth. We have to now begin to massively reduce our population. Since you can't do that by lining people up and shooting them, the only opportunity we have is massively reducing consumption. That's the challenge in the industrialized world. And I believe we have a moral obligation to help the developing world in the island states of the South Pacific. If we look at Africa, which were not contributors to the problem of climate change, but will be the first victims of climate change, we have a moral obligation to help them in any way we can. A lot of it is with money and technology. That's what we need. We know how to bring population down in the developing world. Focus on women, empower women, and give them a bit of financial support, and they will bring the birth rate down. We know that works, but that's going to take time.
Dr. Suzuki, my name is George Papanicolaou. Always a pleasure to have you here in Australia. One of the main problems, obviously, in this debate has been the muddying of the waters deliberately by vested interests in terms of the climate change, global warming debate, and it's very hard to get traction. It's such a complex, chaotic system that it's open to interpretation and misinterpretation and spreading of misinformation. But is it time maybe to change the focus to other things that maybe are much easier to agree on and harder to muddy the waters on, in terms of peak soil, peak phosphate, peak agriculture in a sense, which impact people more directly, and maybe people get their head around a bit more clearly. We have the situation here where local tabloid radio might be rabidly against climate change, but they're also rabidly against coal seam gas. So we seem to have maybe more traction available there. So do you think that's a possible route?
Sure. I mean, I think anything goes. We need diversity of approaches. You know, one way is not going to work. And let's face it, we're losing big time. I realized that I didn't fully answer the question of the Australian problem. I think the Australian problem is a problem we have in Canada and everywhere else. And that is that governments now seem to think that their purpose, politicians get elected to serve the corporate agenda. And the reason for that is that we treat corporations as if they're people. We allow corporations, the big ones are bigger than most countries on the planet, and we allow corporations to fund political candidates. What the hell's going on? They're not people. They exist for one purpose only, to make money. And somehow they're allowed to invest in political campaigns, and then they're allowed first access to whoever we elect to office, where they're allowed to send mega numbers of lobbyists in there to meet with politicians. No wonder politicians dance to the corporate agenda. That's the target. We've got to stop that. Corporations are not people. And we should stop corporate funding of any political activity. We should stop lobbying. We elect people to power to look out for our future. They don't have to be told by corporations how to do it. They've got everybody's best interests in mind. But the disproportionate influence of corporations now. And that's why before the Murdoch press, everybody's knees start shaking because of the power of that particular media giant. That's just unbearable. It cannot continue. We've got to rein in corporations.
G'day, Jack Goff here. Question, I guess, around the economy is fundamentally a management tool that we've used to deal with complexity. And flourishing under that has been a whole heap of progress in terms of human rights, in terms of the freedoms that we're allowed because of that. Humans don't have a very good record when it comes to governments on a large scale intervening in the way that we manage our societies. There's not many good examples of that at all. How do you expect us to manage that enormous complexity without having autocratic governments being engaged?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the number one question. I personally don't think that we evolved to be able to operate at the mega levels that we have, the mega levels of society, so that when you get to the United Nations, it becomes absolutely absurd, because we're simply unable to deal with these issues. And the only thing that we can do is decide on what the priorities are under which we then try to operate and manage. We have to put ecological principles. After all, economics and ecology should be companion disciplines. Ecos is a Greek word for household or domain. Ecologists study our domain, which is the biosphere. Economists, as you say, are to manage it. But we act as if the economists can manage the whole thing without regard to ecological principles. And that's the problem. I keep saying, let's put the eco back into economics, for God's sakes, and let's subordinate economics to ecology. We don't do that. If you did that right away, you'd see that steady growth forever is not ecologically sustainable. It's suicidal. So if we could get our organizations to at least operate under that umbrella, we might have a prayer. Otherwise, I think the real action for change is going on at the local level. And you know, we used to say, think globally, act locally. I think we were wrong on that. Because for most people, when they think globally, they go, oh my God, it's a massive problem. I'm insignificant. What difference does it make? But if you think locally and act locally, you can actually see the impact of what you're doing. And it's very empowering to do that. And that's why when I look at Sydney, I praise Clover to the skies, because this is the kind of model that we desperately need at that local level. Vancouver now, I learned, has come over here and Vancouver wants to be the greenest city in the world by 2020. Well, that's great. You know, I think it's ridiculous to think that, but let's try. And we've come over and said, what are you doing, Sydney? Because we want to mimic what you're doing here. It's a very exciting time at the level of cities or individuals.
Hello, my name is Loretta Picconi. I'm a Master of Fine Arts student, and I agree with you about the importance of paradigm shift. In fact, one of my works was about the non-distinction between humans and ourselves. I'm very much driven by the idea of love. My concern is in relation to clean air and food, because really in the last few years, even though we have wonderful people like Clover Moore, the reality of our governments, Labor and Liberal, are being prepared to risk our food-rich areas that are actually getting very, very close to urban life. The Hunter Valley, past Liverpool, we have real issues with coal seam gas, and I have enormous fears about nuclear uranium mining for high-grade uranium and sort of entering that whole thing. My question is, what can you do to help us to speak with our current party to help them confront the reality that they are compromising now our food and our water so close to urban life. It's so close. It's within.
I don't
hundreds.
vote here. I'm not a citizen. What are you asking
Well,
me
what
for?
can you say to them as a statement today?
Pardon me? I think that was more of a statement than a question. But
Thank you. The point I would like to make is that
aim it right at your mouth.
the Bureau of Meteorology in Australia released a report recently about the dreadful events which characterized last August. It was the worst of this, and it was the worst of that, and it was the worst of the other. 2 weeks later, we elected Tony Abbott into government, knowing that central plank of his policy was getting rid of the carbon tax, and in fact backing right away from any action on this. I have the feeling that we may have left effective action far too late and rendered it far too difficult. We don't just have 400 parts per million, we've got 478 if we take on the other greenhouse gases, methane, nitrous oxide and so on. It's far too late for the sort of action that you're talking about. And what I would like to ask, my central question to you is, what event now would cause mass action? What event now would cause us to...
Hold the mic to your mouth, please. Can everybody hear what he's saying? Because you're the ones that should be hearing this, not me. He's saying it's too late. That in reality, when you look at things like CFCs and methane and other greenhouse gases, the actual footprint, carbon footprint, is of what, 470 some odd parts per million. So it's way, we're talking about catastrophic rise within this century. What can we do? Well, I don't know. I think, we've been talking about it now for over 2 decades, since in 1988, politicians heard what we were talking about. They knew that climate change in 1988 was the major issue facing us. And what you've had is 2 decades of massive amounts of money invested by the fossil fuel industry to say that climate change is junk science. So how do we get a man like Mr. Abbott, your new prime minister, who is beholden to the corporate sector? You think that you're going to be able to convince him? I don't see it. So I thought that we were going to be helped after Hurricane Katrina. I thought we were going to be helped after 600 people died in Chicago one summer of heat stroke. I thought we were going to be helped when 3,000 Europeans died of heat stroke. I think it was 3,000 in Paris, 15,000 Europeans. I thought that it would, I was hoping it would happen after 2008 with the economic meltdown. So my own feeling is, if we're going to really go full tilt on dealing in a serious way, there are 2 things that could happen, and I think it will be unbelievably painful. A total economic meltdown of the stock market of the order of 1929, like a massive meltdown. That would, I think, do it. But the other thing is a massive epidemic. And the reason why you see organizations like the CDC, the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, jumping around when there's a SARS epidemic or H1N1 or these new, is they're expecting the new one to come out. There's never been so much yummy human protoplasm on the planet as there is now, just waiting for something. And there's this phenomenon called zoonosis. Zoonosis is a process whereby new diseases affecting humans jump over to us from other creatures. Over half of the diseases we get now are zoonotic. The traditional ones were tetanus and cholera and malaria. But now there are new diseases because as we destroy wilderness, we drive animals together that had never been in close proximity. And when you get animals together, they can exchange viruses that jump and exchange genetic material. So then you get Kendra, and you get Ebola, and then you get Marburg, and you get HIV, and you get hantavirus, and there are dozens of new diseases that are now zoonotic. And I'm just reading unfortunately, it's a tome called The Great Plague about the 1918 Spanish flu epidemic. Man, everybody should read that. It's an eye opener. So I think a lot of people are terrified at the prospect of a great plague, and that will have a big impact.
I think it's only appropriate we
Yep.
end the
Last question.
with one of the young
Go ahead.
members in the audience.
Hi David, my name is Lockie. I'm 10. Just can you give me any ideas for what I can study in the future and become?
Many young people ask me that. David, how do I become an environmentalist? What do I do? And I always say, follow your heart. You want to be an artist? Do you want to be a musician? You want to be a teacher? You want to be a plumber or a carpenter? Do what you love to do, because that's what you're going to do best. You see, being environmentalism is not a specialty or a discipline like being a doctor or a teacher or a garage mechanic. Those are all specialties. Environmentalism is a psychological thing about the way we see the world and our place in it. And we need everybody to see the world through the lenses of environmentalism. So follow your heart. What do you like to do? What do you like to do? Huh?
Sorry.
You're very young.
At school I do some projects where I had to reduce amount of straws in my neighborhood at my school, and a boy from America came and talked to me about it, and he was touring the world for an anti-straw campaign. So
well, you've got the whole world of areas to aim at. So just follow your heart and do whatever you do. But I do have a suggestion. Where do you live? In Sydney?
Yes.
Get outside. In Canada today, the average child your age spends 8 minutes a day outside and 6 hours a day in front of a television, computer, or a cell phone screen. That's something fundamentally wrong. So get outside and fall in love with Mother Nature, because we'll only fight to protect what we love, okay?